skimming over my thigh.
No.
I barely recognized my own voice, breathless, desperate. The door behind me opened and I was pulled inside. A bedroom. Large, luxurious. The city lights glowed through the massive windows, illuminating the decadent space. I barely had time to take it in before his hands were on me again, unzipping my dress in one swift motion. The silk slid from my shoulders, pooling at my feet. I stood there, exposed, watching as his gaze darkened. "Fucking beautiful," he murmured, tracing his fingers along the curve of my waist. Then he was kissing me again, hot, urgent, consuming. His hands were everywhere, mapping my skin, branding me. I clawed at his shirt, desperate to feel him, to drown in him. We crashed onto the bed in a tangle of limbs, breathless laughter mixing with gasps and moans. My nails raked down his back as he pushed me into the mattress, his body pressing me down, claiming me. "Are you sure about this?" he asked, his voice rough with restraint. Yes. The moment the word left my lips, there was no going back. His hands parted my thighs, his mouth following, his touch setting fire to every nerve in my body. My back arched, fingers twisting into the sheets as pleasure crashed over me in waves. He didn't stop, didn't give me a moment to recover. By the time he finally entered me, slow and deep, I was already unraveling beneath him. His name. I should have asked for his name, but by then it was too late. I woke up to the warmth of tangled sheets and the lingering scent of sex in the air. My body ached in a way that only came from indulgence, deep, raw, and unforgettable. The cool morning light streamed through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows, casting a golden glow over the silk sheets. For a moment I stayed still, letting reality settle around me. The taste of last night still lingered on my lips, the memory of his hands, his mouth. His body still burned into my skin. I turned slightly, my breath hitching when I saw him. The man who had unraveled me in the dark. He was lying on his side, his toned back exposed, the sheets hanging dangerously low around his waist. His dark hair was slightly tousled, his breathing slow, deep. I had slept with a stranger. A thrill shot through me, but it was quickly drowned by a creeping sense of guilt. Ethan. My husband. I had betrayed him. But wasn't that what I wanted? To feel something? To escape the numbness that came with being his wife? I swallowed hard, forcing the thoughts away. This wasn't the time for regret. I needed to leave. Carefully, I slid out from under the sheets, reaching for my dress that was discarded carelessly on the floor. My legs felt weak as I straightened, my body still tender from the intensity of last night. I had to leave before he woke up, but fate had other plans. Just as I turned, a deep voice still laced with sleep broke the silence. "Leaving so soon?" My heart lurched. I glanced over my shoulder, finding him awake, watching me with a lazy smirk. His eyes, dark, intense, held a challenge, amusement dancing in their depths. "I should go," I murmured, slipping my arms into the dress, fumbling with the zipper. He pushed himself up, the sheets slipping down, revealing more of his perfectly sculpted torso. The air between us shifted, thick with unspoken tension. "You don't even know my name," he mused, tilting his head slightly. I swallowed. "I don't need to." He chuckled low and knowing. "You should. It might change things." A strange feeling stirred inside me. Something was off. The way he was looking at me, the way he said those words, it sent a shiver down my spine. "What do you mean?" I asked cautiously. He stood up then, completely unashamed of his nakedness, his confidence making it impossible to look away. He took his time, slipping on his dress pants, buttoning them up with an ease that was almost maddening. Then he turned to me, smirking as he leaned back against the edge of the bed. "You really don't recognize me, do you?" My brows knitted together. "Should I?" He exhaled a quiet laugh, shaking his head. Then he said it. "Tristan." The name hit me like a slap. My stomach dropped. Tristan. No, it couldn't be. My breath caught as realization crashed over me like a tidal wave. The sharp jawline, the familiar smirk, the piercing gaze. It all made sense now. How had I not seen it before? How had I been so blind? Because I had never looked. I had never paid attention to him beyond what was necessary. Tristan Lancaster. My husband's younger brother. "Oh my God," I whispered, staggering back. His smirk widened, but there was something cold in his eyes. Something that sent chills through me. Surprise. My pulse pounded in my ears. This wasn't just a mistake. This was a catastrophe. You knew, I accused, my voice barely above a whisper. His smirk faltered for just a second before he pushed off the bed, stepping closer. Of course I knew. A wave of nausea rolled through me. You planned this. His jaw clenched. I gave you the choice, didn't I? You wanted this just as much as I did. I shook my head trying to piece it together. It didn't make sense. Why? His expression darkened, something dangerous flashing behind his eyes. Why do you think? His voice was quiet, but there was an edge to it. My throat felt dry. He took another step closer, his gaze locking onto mine. Because Ethan took something from me. And now I've taken something from him. The words hung heavy between us, thick with implications. My blood ran cold. This was revenge. My voice cracked. Tristan didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached for his shirt, sliding it on with a slow, deliberate motion. Then he finally spoke. You think Ethan is the perfect husband, don't you? His tone was mocking. I didn't respond. He scoffed. He's not. He never was. He's a thief. A liar. A selfish bastard who takes whatever he wants and doesn't care, who he destroys in the process. His jaw tightened, his voice dripping with bitterness. And I've been waiting for years to take something from him. Something that matters. My stomach twisted. I don't belong to him. I bit out, my anger rising to the surface. His gaze flickered. Something unreadable passing through it. No, he admitted. You don't. For a moment silence stretched between us. The reality of what I had done, of what we had done, settled around me like a suffocating weight. I needed to get out of here. Turning sharply, I reached for the door, my fingers trembling. But before I could step through, his voice stopped me. This doesn't have to end here. I froze. Slowly I turned my head, meeting his eyes. There was no cruelty in them now. No malice. Just something dark, something tempting. You felt it too. Didn't you? He murmured. I opened my mouth to deny it, to say that last night had been a mistake, that I regretted it. But the words wouldn't come, because we both knew the truth. The only real mistake was that I wanted more. I wanted to walk away. I should have, but I didn't. Instead, I stood there, my fingers still curled around the door handle. My body frozen between two impossible choices. My mind screamed at me to leave, to pretend last night never happened, to return to the life I had built with Ethan. But my body, my traitorous, aching body, was still humming with the memory of Tristan. The way he touched me, the way he made me feel alive. You don't have to be afraid of this. His voice was quiet but firm. I turned to face him. Afraid? I let out a sharp, humorless laugh. You think I'm afraid? Tristan stepped closer, his movements slow, calculated. I think you're terrified. I clenched my jaw, refusing to let him see how right he was. This was a mistake, I whispered, shaking my head. I love my husband. Tristan's smirk returned, but this time it was laced with something darker. Love? He tilted his head, eyes narrowing. If you loved him, you wouldn't have been in my bed last night. I sucked in a sharp breath. His words cut deeper than they should have, because they were true. I had spent years convincing myself that Ethan was the man I was meant to be with. He was charming, successful, well-mannered, the perfect husband in every way. But perfection was cold. The weight of what had happened was suffocating. I stood outside the penthouse, my fingers trembling as I reached for the door. I had to pull myself together. I had to erase last night from my mind. The moment I stepped inside, I was greeted by the familiar scent of Ethan's cologne. He was sitting on the couch, a glass of whiskey in hand, his sharp blue eyes lifting to meet mine. Morning. My hands trembled as I pressed them against my face. I should feel relieved that Ethan didn't suspect anything. But instead all I felt was suffocated. Tristan was right. I couldn't sit across from him at the dining table without feeling his eyes linger on me, as if he could sense the storm raging beneath my skin. I couldn't meet his touch without remembering the way Tristan had held me, had claimed me, had ruined me. The guilt was suffocating, but it wasn't enough to extinguish the fire burning inside me. And that terrified me. By midnight, Ethan had gone to bed, his even breathing filling the silence of our bedroom. I lay beside him, eyes open, body tense. Sleep was impossible, because all I could think about was Tristan. His words echoed in my mind like a curse. When you can't take it anymore, you'll come back. And he was right. I slipped out of bed as quietly as possible, heart pounding as I tiptoed toward the closet. My fingers trembled as I grabbed my coat, slipping it over the silky nightgown Ethan had bought me. I told myself I was only going for a drive, that I needed fresh air. But when I got into my car, my hands moved on their own, steering toward the one place I shouldn't go. Tristan's penthouse was exactly as I remembered, sleek, modern, drowning in wealth and danger. I hesitated at the door, my breath shallow, my body betraying me. I should leave. I should turn around before I made another mistake. But then the door opened. Tristan stood there, shirtless, his sweatpants hanging dangerously low on his hips. His dark eyes scanned me from head to toe, amusement curling at the corners of his lips. "I told you," he murmured, leaning against the doorway. "You'd come back." I hated how right he was. I pushed past him, stepping inside before I could change my mind. The air was thick with tension, electric and suffocating all at once. Tristan shut the door behind me, the sound locking us in together. "So," he drawled, stepping closer, "what excuse did you give Ethan this time?" I swallowed hard. "He's asleep. He doesn't know I left." Tristan chuckled, shaking his head. "Poor guy. So oblivious." I flinched at his words, but I didn't deny them. Instead, I turned to face him, my pulse hammering. "This is the last time," I whispered, though even I didn't believe it. Tristan smirked. "Sure it is." And then he kissed me. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't hesitant. It was raw, possessive, filled with the kind of hunger that stole the breath from my lungs. I gasped against his mouth, my fingers digging into his bare shoulders, my body melting into his as if I had no control over it. His hands roamed my body, tracing every curve, every inch he had already claimed. He lifted me effortlessly, carrying me toward the bedroom like he had done the night before. But this time I wasn't drunk. This time, I knew exactly what I was doing, and I wanted it. I wanted the way he ripped my coat from my shoulders, the way his lips traced down my neck, the way his hands roamed beneath my nightgown, setting my skin on fire. I wanted the way he made me forget about Ethan, forget about the guilt, forget about everything except the way he made me feel. Alive. Addicted. Ruined. Hours later, I lay tangled in Tristan's sheets, my body spent, my mind trapped in a war I was losing. Tristan propped himself up on one elbow, his fingers tracing lazy circles on my bare thigh. "Still convinced this is the last time?" I swallowed, my throat dry. "Yes." He chuckled, shaking his head. "You're such a bad liar." I turned away, staring at the ceiling. "This isn't who I am." Tristan exhaled slowly. "Then who are you, Tram?" I opened my mouth, but no words came, because I didn't know anymore. For so long, I had played the role of the perfect wife, the perfect woman. But now I was something else. Something darker. Something reckless. Something his. And worst of all, I didn't hate it. Tristan shifted closer, his lips brushing my shoulder. "You're not leaving him, are you?" The question sent a jolt through me. "No," he hummed, his fingers skimming over my hip. "Then I guess I'll just have to keep borrowing you." A shiver ran through me, not from fear, but from something far worse. Anticipation. I closed my eyes, guilt clawing at my insides. This was a mistake, but I already knew I'd make it again. The guilt clung to me like the scent of Tristan on my skin. I sat in my car outside his penthouse for what felt like hours, staring at my reflection in the rearview mirror. My lips were swollen, my body marked by his touch, my soul tainted by my choices. I should go home. I should slide back into bed beside Ethan. Pretend I had never left. Pretend I wasn't falling deeper into something I could never escape. But as I drove through the empty streets, my phone buzzed. A message from Tristan. "Next time, don't sneak out. I like waking up to you." My fingers clenched around the steering wheel. He was playing with me, twisting me in his hands like I was a toy meant for his amusement. But worse than that, he was winning. I tried to act normal when I got home. I slipped into bed beside Ethan, turning my back to him, hoping he wouldn't stir. But then his arm wrapped around my waist, pulling me close. "Where were you?" His voice was groggy, laced with sleep. Panic shot through me. I couldn't sleep. "I went for a drive," he hummed, his lips pressing a kiss against my shoulder. "You've been restless lately. Is something wrong?" Everything was wrong. I forced a smile, though he couldn't see it. "No, just stress. It'll pass." Ethan sighed, holding me a little tighter. "You know you can talk to me, right?" I closed my eyes. If only he knew. If only he knew that every time he touched me, I felt like I was betraying him. That every time I closed my eyes, I saw his brother. That I had already crossed a line I could never uncross. Days passed. I avoided Tristan, or at least I tried to, but he made sure I never could. The messages came first. Little reminders that he was there, lurking beneath the surface of my carefully crafted life. "Thinking about me? Still taste me on your lips? You can pretend all you want, but we both know you'll be back." And damn him, he was right. It wasn't supposed to happen again, but it did. In the dim hallway of my home, while Ethan was out, Tristan cornered me against the wall.